How do you fancy getting your hands on a signed England ODI bat? All you need to do is answer a very short survey that we've listed in the description. Why not give it a go? Hello and welcome to the Wisden Women's Cricket Weekly podcast. We've got some England squad announcements to talk through. The Paige Scholfield bandwagon rolls on, while England have dropped and then recalled Alice Capsey since last week's episode. I'm Rana, and first you'll hear from Courtney Winfield-Hill and then Katya Witney on all the news from the last week. The section I recorded with Katya was done before the news came through that Alice Capsey was recalled to the T20I squad. Lauren, the big news from the squad announcement was that Alice Capsey had been left out of the T20I squad. This morning it's been confirmed that she's been added back in on account of a couple of players carrying minor injuries. First of all, what did you think of the original decision to drop Capsey? That was the big post-World Cup call. Jon Lewis said that she'd been on a downward trend and that she needed a reset, which is interesting now that she's back in. It feels like the messaging's a little bit mixed around that original decision.
Yeah, I think initially I was quite shocked, to be honest. I think she's obviously a young player that it feels like England have invested in a lot. You know, and you look back to the Ashes series in England, she played remarkably well against the Aussies. And I think it's a difficult one because I sort of see both sides of it because she is such a young player, but I think she's played 50 games now for England. So really on stats of caps and things like that, she is actually quite experienced now, but she's still got this thing where she's still so young in age and, just like life experience and maturity and emotional intelligence and all these sorts of things that, I'm not saying she doesn't have those things, but like she's still very young. But then you look at you look at ESPN and you think, well, actually she has played quite a lot of games and her last run of scores aren't great. And if that was a 26-year-old, they'd probably get dropped, on pure statistics and form. The interest, like you say, it is very interesting that he felt like she needed a reset, but then he's allowed her to come play in the Big Bash. Where are you getting the reset if you felt like she needed a reset? Because obviously she'd gone straight from the World Cup to here. So that was an interesting one. Like if you felt like she needed a reset, then do you not say, well, we don't want you to play Big Bash because we want you to be flying for England and the Ashes and the rest of it, and then to recall her when there's a few niggles around. So I do agree with it's a slightly mixed message, and I still think she's the next best batter in. So on that premise, then of course you recall her. But yeah, the reset thing's an interesting narrative, and whether that's something that she feels she needs a reset or if that's coming from the management team or which way that dialogue is. But her stats have been trending in the wrong direction from where she was. I think really before she probably did a collarbone, and then we've seen glimpses of what she can do in international cricket since then, but we haven't seen, he's spoken a little bit about the desire for more consistent performances, and we haven't seen that. So I was shocked, but if you delve into it, it's a stats driven game. Doesn't matter how old you are, or it's a form game. If you're scoring runs, you're safe, and if you're not, you're not.
I suppose there are a few other interesting aspects to it. I completely agree that her numbers recently haven't been great, but there are players who've been retained for the South Africa trip who've also had relatively quiet 6-month periods. Maya Boucher, for example, if you compare her numbers to Capsey's to the start of the home New Zealand series, they're very similar. I guess I wanted to get your perspective of someone who is a teammate and captain of Capsey. I understand the desire for a reset just in terms of she's still so young. She plays a lot of cricket. She's already played 50 times. For England, she plays WBBL, she plays WPL, so there's not a lot of time for her to have long breaks. As a teammate and captain of her, what do you think that she needs right now? Because she has played just a lot for someone so young.
I think it's just for her to try and reignite a little bit of that consistency. And I think, some people need time away to sort of just recalibrate, spend some time away from the game, fill up your cup in other ways, or it's whether actually the more experiences she can have, the more different scenarios she's in, the better that she'll become. From without speaking to her and actually knowing where she's at, like, is she physically fatigued? Is she, a bit mentally over it? Or actually, does she feel great? Like I know when I caught up with her out here, she was really enjoying the Renegades and the environment and just being around the group and trying to win games for the Renegades. So she certainly doesn't feel like, from what I've heard from her, she doesn't feel like she needs a break from the game necessarily. A reset might just be, okay, well, let's just look at your game. Where are you at? Is there trends where you're getting out, in a similar way? Is it going too hard too early? Is it not going hard enough to, you know? And the other thing is, she has played in different roles. She sort of was using that number 3 role. And then, if you're outside the power play, she comes in a bit later down. So there's probably a little bit of, what do you want to be and how do you want that to look for Capsey herself? Do you want to be a number 3? Right. Okay. Well, what does it require to be a number 3? And I think, trying to find that consistency in role and consistency in her game. But yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one. Like from all I know with Caps is, just create an environment where she's got the freedom to express herself and take responsibility and hold her accountable to that, which, I'm no doubt that they're doing. Yeah, and it's just time. Like, just give somebody time and space, in terms of playing for England comes with a lot of pressure. I'm sure she probably feels differently in franchise cricket than she does playing for England because you're just under that little bit more scrutiny. It just weighs that little bit heavier. And just give her that space to, you can get it wrong. Like you're young, you've got 10, 15 years left to get it right. So just give her that space as well.
There's been an addition to the coaching staff that we should briefly touch on too. Courtney Winfield-Hill will join England's coaching team this winter for the Tour of South Africa and the Ashes down under. For people that don't know, Courtney is, 1, your wife, but also 2, that she's been involved with the ECB for a little while now.
Yeah, we've got the undercover Aussie joining the ranks. Yeah, no, really cool for her. Like she's been involved casually, I guess, like on a sort of consultancy basis with England A, some of the under-19 stuff. She toured to Sri Lanka with the 19s. And then obviously went to Ireland with that England squad that was taken over there. So yeah, really cool opportunity for her. I think having been in the English system and having been in a household with Courtney and married to Courtney, I think she'll bring some great fresh energy. She sees the game very differently. I know even just from working with her coaching me, she'll challenge me on things that I sort of never really thought of or doing things slightly different, which I think will be really refreshing for that England environment. She's hyperactive and full of energy. So if nothing else, they'll she'll bring a bit of fun and a bit of zest to to that space. So yeah, really cool for her. And she, like she's got some when she was working for the Northern Diamonds, you sort of get in a full-time role and you can't explore other environments. You can't do, you can't take on other competitions and tournaments all around the world. And when she sort of made the decision, she left that role for lots of reasons, really. Like we obviously were traveling all over at the time and things like that. And I was out of the country a lot. And she, we just wanted more flexibility. But I think a key thing that's enabled her to do is say yes. So WPL, WBBL, England Academy, is probably in quite a lucky position where if you're holding down a full-time role, you can't say yes to all these different environments. So she's banked up nice experiences, obviously winning the WPL with RCB. But the most exciting thing for her is that she's been able to say yes and had all these experiences around the world. It's probably quite unusual, you don't generally you play just cricket and then coach just cricket, where she's been across multiple sports and multiple environments, both in teaching and coaching.
Sounds like someone we should get on the show at some point. If only we had an in with her to get her on.
Yeah. Oh, you might need to leave a bit of time because she can talk.
Just finally, the WBBL is approaching. I guess we're getting closer to the end of the group stage. The table is very, very tight up top, and every day it feels like you look at the headlines of the competition, and there's just another 20-year-old who's done really well. Georgia Vols scored a lot of runs recently. I think yesterday Hamilton took 5 for 8. She's played under 19 cricket for Australia. How's the competition going?
Yeah, it's really good. I think we're sort of used to it a little bit with the 100, how it sort of feels like nothing happens and then everything happens in the last sort of 3 games where everyone's fighting for the top 4 spots and net run rate and all this sort of stuff. So I think the condensed tournament has made it really exciting. It's made every game count, which obviously is what they wanted to achieve in terms of changing the schedule. But yeah, I think, there's lots of talent and lots of different people putting their hands up. Obviously Lucy Hamilton's at the Brisbane Heat with me, and she's an awesome talent. Like, I just think she's got, yeah, like, just when I spoke about like Rhiannon McDonald-Gay, and I thought, I said about it's not her skills that I really believe will take her far. Lucy's a bit like that. She's just got this calm confidence. She's very professional. She's not overawed by pressure. She just carries herself really well for such a young player. So it's no surprise that, like, she hadn't played much before that because she had exams at school. So she missed schoolies and took a fiver instead. So yeah, she's there's some really good, some really great youngsters that have done exceptionally well. But I think on the whole, the comp's been way better with that short schedule. It's made, every game count, and you can't slip up for too long. We sort of had a decent start, lost a few games, and all of a sudden it's like, God, if we lose the next 1 or 2, we're out. And just like that whole U-turn of the Adelaide strike has been that, the back-to-back champions and bottom of the table it's nice to see different teams in the hunt. Hobart Hurricanes have gone good this year. Sydney Thunder have gone good. The Renegades have gone good, where some of those teams have sort of struggled for a little while. So it's open the floor right up, which is fantastic.
Yeah, and as I said, the table's pretty tight at the moment, but also it's teams' net run rates are really, really tight at the moment. It's not as if like a team's run away with it and is completely dominating. Anyway, lots of cricket to come in the next week or two. This time next week, the first England-South Africa game would have happened, and also lots of WBBL action to look forward to as well. Cheers for your time, Lauren. Catch you next week. Katya, let's start with the biggest news. Alice Capsey is in the ODI squad for the Tour of South Africa, but not the T20I group. Why have England left her out of the T20 squad?
Well, the reasoning given by Jon Lewis was that Capsey has been trending down in T20Is for a while, and that they thought this was a good opportunity for her to have a reset, take some time out, work on her game and come back in. And that in that role at number 3, she wasn't quite performing as consistently and as they would want her to. She only scored 29 runs across 3 innings in that World Cup. So I can see where they're coming from in terms of the exclusion. She has been trending down in T20Is for a little bit of time. This year, of anyone who's scored 10 runs or more for England in T20Is, she has the lowest strike rate of anyone. And that, in terms of the job that they want her to do, they want her to come in at number 3 and move the innings on and be aggressive in the power play if she comes in then. And she hasn't been doing that, which is the reasoning they've given for dropping her. So I think you can kind of see the reasoning behind the exclusion. I think the only thing that's slightly odd, well, the 2 things that are slightly odd about it is A, she's still included in the ODI side, and B, you can make the same case that you've made for Capsey for a couple of other players in that squad for dropping them. And by only dropping her, it does kind of give the impression that you're putting almost the sole blame on her for that. Well, even if that's obviously not what they're thinking, but it does give that impression just from an optics point of view that you've looked at what happened in the World Cup and this is what you think needs to change to stop that happening again. It's not a good impression from my view when there are other players who also you could make the same case for. And with the ODI stuff, she hasn't cracked ODIs at all. She's been moved up and down the order a little bit. She hasn't found a regular spot in the 11. And if you really want to give her an opportunity to go away and have a big reset and come back stronger, she's not scoring any runs in the WBBL either. So it would seem like she's also been dropped from the test squad. She hasn't made a test debut yet, but she was in the last test squad that England named. It just feels a little bit odd to then bring her back out to South Africa just for the ODI series.
It's a very short reset.
It's
isn't
a
it?
very short reset.
If she's there for one squad and the other. Yeah, I think it's quite interesting. Well, first of all, on the blame stuff, I think it's okay. Jon Lewis is actually the group of players he was explicitly critical about in the press conference were the bowlers. If he has pinned the blame on anyone for England's World Cup exit, it's how England bowled in the first 8 to 9 overs of that game. So I'm not worried about that. You can drop someone without blaming them for a defeat. What I find quite interesting is the degree to which she had this perceived downturn in form. I actually don't think is that much of a downturn. So sure, she only scored 29 runs in the World Cup. She only batted 3 times. One of them was against West Indies, where she would run out for one. Who was she run out by? Maya Bouchier basically hit the ball into the offside and just said yes, and Capsey was out by a mile. And 3 innings before the World Cup, she hit a match-winning 67 to guide England home at Canterbury in a game that England only just won. It was one of the closer games in the summer. And the strike rate thing, I do get, but equally, Lauren said this a lot about Capsey in the last year as well, is that actually part of Capsey's development as a player has been, especially when she's batting 3, is to have the flexibility to adapt to different situations. And sometimes, now that she is batting 3, perhaps more when previously she opened a fair bit, her job is to react to exactly how an innings is going. And sometimes you're doing the team job if you're striking 100. Obviously, striking 100 over a year isn't great, but I think there is mitigation in that fact. It is not as if she is an opener whose job is to set the tone in the power play. That's not quite her job. And I also think it's quite interesting. She's been dropped, and other players who I think have pretty similar records in recent times haven't been dropped. So Maya Bouchier, for example, had that amazing tour of New Zealand, which in terms of cricket played is quite a long time ago now. She didn't have a great domestic summer, both internationally and for her domestic sides. Her only score above 35 since the start of the English summer was the 60-odd against Scotland at the World Cup. If you're looking at the World Cup, she had 2 really difficult innings, 8 off 20 against South Africa, 14 off 19 against West Indies, including the run out of Capsey as well. She's also 5.5 years older than Capsey. I'd understand it more if Capsey properly got the opportunity to do a reset, but it feels it's sort of in the middle here, and it's a really big show of faith to the other players in that batting group. Amy Jones is probably another one whose recent form hasn't been amazing as well.
I think the Bouchier stuff is weird, more than anything that she's also been included in the test squad. Like, she's clearly struggling for form, and you've included her in a squad that she very well could make the 11 in a format that she's not played before, rather than letting her find her feet again in T20s and ODIs. And ODIs is the format she's probably best at as well. I think you can make a case for Bouchier. I think their point will be that Bouchier, I know your point in terms of cricket played, but Bouchier did only come into the side in March, which is only about 6-7 months ago. So I think that will be their thinking behind that. You definitely can make a case for her similar to Capsey, though, that her form since that New Zealand tour has been on a downward turn. But England still won their home summer unbeaten with Bouchier in the side. She did play a couple of important knocks, even though they're not eye-catching when you look at them. She had a terrible, terrible World Cup, but as Lewis, there are a couple of players who had terrible, terrible World Cups and they've not been dropped as well. The test call-ups thing, I think, is weird. In terms of Amy Jones, we've made this point many, many times about Amy Jones, that, she hasn't scored a half-century in T20I, half-century in nearly 5 years. Her form has been pretty sporadic over the last couple of years, but there aren't people coming up to replace her and take the gloves. They've included Bess Heath on this tour as a backup wicketkeeper, so they're clearly sticking with that approach of Bess Heath as a second choice wicketkeeper. But we've made the point before that Bess Heath's recent form has also been pretty patchy, and she doesn't normally keep in domestic cricket either. So there's that. So yeah, I think with the Capsey stuff, it's worth making the point about Capsey that Capsey came through off the back of a really, really good performance in the first edition of the 100 when she was really young. She was 17 and then got called up for England the following year, still before she was going to turn 18, off the back of a winter in the WBBL where she did really, really well. And she initially did pretty well in T20s and recently has kind of been on... I mean, as in Lewis's words, a downward trend. From where she started, it's a downward trend, but she did start really, really high. And she became this kind of great white hope of the future of English women's cricket. You know, she's going to be the best England batter that ever lived by the time she's finished her career. And that was also a time that we've discussed a little bit where women's cricketers were very, very marketable and had brands around them that possibly inflated a little bit where they were currently at. You know, you think of the Izzy Wongs and the aura that was around that initial women's 100, where the women's 100 completely exceeded expectations of how well and how marketable it was. And these young, very young players came through off the back of that. And they're still really, really young. And we've criticised England before for either keeping players in the side too long where they're not performing or discarding them to the scrap heap too early. That's not what's going to happen with Capsey. And I do think that it is probably a good time for a reset for her. She's had 3 years on the kind of top bits of England cricket and she's still only 20. Now is a good time to kind of have a bit of a reset, have a bit of a think about the career going forward and keep going. She's just so young. She'll come back inside. And as Jon Lewis said in the press conference, no doubt she'll play many, many games of cricket for England in the future. But right now it does feel like a good time just to take stock a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, she is so young, but that's not what's happening. They have included her in the ODI.
Yeah, that is the weird stuff. That's my opinion of what should happen, that she should be given the opportunity for a reset. The ODI stuff I think is a bit weird.
I also think that different professionals will have different perspectives on this. Is actually taking a total reset and going out of the system, is that actually the best thing for a player's development? I still think that Capsey is in the best 6 players that England have, even if she's out of form. And I don't think... I just think it's a little bit strange that Capsey is the one that they've decided to be harsh on. I think they could have made a similar decision on quite a few players. I find it interesting that they've chosen Capsey to be the one to take some time out at the moment. Moving on, you were on the press conference call with Jon Lewis the other day. Would it be fair to say that it was spikier than usual for a squad announcement?
I think it was a little bit spiky. I mean, I think any press conference that when you've come off the back of a really disappointing World Cup campaign, you're going to be asked some difficult questions. And I think there was a little bit of spikiness in it. He was asked about whether he was considering his immediate future as England's head coach. And he completely kind of disregarded that and was very much like, this is a very young team, we're a developing team. But yeah, it was a little bit. I think Jon Lewis has never been kind of one to sit back and take stuff lying down anyway. I think he's always been one to push back. And particularly on the issue of fitness that was raised and questioning his position and on leadership within the side, he was pretty firm in how he pushed back on that.
On the fitness thing, that seemed to be the area where there seemed to be most disagreement between Lewis and some of the journalists there. Lewis said there'll be a sharp learning curve for the players involved. I really trust our players and they train incredibly hard. But the female game in particular is getting a lot more scrutiny than it ever got before. Unfortunately for the players, that's something they're going to have to think about and understand the consequences of the misconception of what they're doing and how people can misconceive a social media post. I guess there are quite a few things going on here. There's the original quote from Alex Hartley when she says about 80% of the England team are fit and athletic enough, but there are girls on that side who are letting the team down. I think that quote has been taken out of context a little bit. I think people have said that Alex Hartley just thinks they're not fit enough when she actually only said 20% of them might not be fit enough. There's also almost slightly separate to that is the idea that actually England were taking it easy a little bit out in the Caribbean, and Lewis pushed back really hard on that. What do you think? Do you think that there's an attitude issue? You know, that was one of the things that I guess there seemed to be a difference in opinion between the journalists on the call and Lewis. And I think it's quite interesting. If you go back 5 years, right, that the perception was that the England squad was almost too serious. That in the early days of professionalisation, they almost felt obliged to prove that they deserved to be professionals. And it's great that we're past that point now and players can be themselves, show who they are on social media, and also be international sports people. But equally, I don't know, is the balance right? Because at the same time, you want to be the absolute best in the world, and they are giving the perception that they might not be the hardest workers in between games. What do you think of all that?
I think, firstly, that quote that you referenced from Jon Lewis was in response to a question asking about players' Instagram stories and what they were posting on their Instagram stories while they were at the World Cup, whether they were out when they shouldn't have been out, or whether they were taking the World Cup as seriously as they should have been. And I think the fitness issue is a slightly separate issue to that. In terms of Lewis himself, he's very much allowed players freedom. He's come into that setup, which, as you said, was always known as quite serious. And if you look at Heather Knight, who's been in charge for so long now, she's quite a serious person. And I don't think that naturally she would be the kind of person who would be like, go out.
The charge.
Yeah, exactly. Very laissez-faire kind of approach to it. I don't think she's that kind of person. So I think it is quite a good thing that there is a coach that's come in and allowed her to take a bit more of a hands-off approach. But it's almost like they're polar opposites in it.
You see it all the time in sports. You go from one regime that has a certain philosophy and you go to the total extreme opposite. It's a pretty common thing.
Yeah.
And often the balance is probably somewhere in the middle between the two.
Yeah, and I think Lewis has come in straight from that England men's setup of around 2021 Ashes kind of time that was also very much like allow the players to relax and allow the players to take responsibility for what they're doing off the field. And he's taken that attitude straight into the women's side. And I think it is the most freedom that these players have been allowed since they turned professional, which, as you said, is a good thing. But with that comes a lot of responsibility, and these players are incredibly young. Most of them are in their early 20s. Does that work when players are that young? And Lewis said on the call that these are young players and young people, and they're not always going to get it right. So how much that completely hands-off approach works when you're dealing with younger players in a very exciting place during a T20 World Cup, I don't know. I think there is a balance to be found there, and players need to build up that level of trust, and with the fitness issue as well, as Lewis said on the call again, there's lots of different paths to fitness. So if you're saying the team aren't fit, there's a difference from saying a team aren't fit and a team are not fit for that particular match day. If they've been out or if they've been whatever they've been doing, there's a difference in that.
And there aren't serious insinuations that England rock up to games hungover. That's not what people are talking about. I do agree with Lewis that there is a sharp learning curve in terms of what you post on social media, and that as young women in a social media age, they want to post on social media and they want to post what they're doing on social media. But there is a learning curve when you're a professional sports person at a T20 World Cup. There's stuff you shouldn't be posting on social media. I think, I don't know which pod we should do it on, but there's definitely an episode to be done on how social media is very different for young players now to players, both men's and women's game, who are maybe late 20s, early 30s. Because back then, players would read about stuff on Twitter, and I've had this conversation with a few journalists, and players would read stuff on Twitter, and you're like, why are you on Twitter? Come on, what do you gain as a player reading stuff on Twitter? So lots of players come off Twitter. But now, the default that people see, the apps that people use most are TikTok and Instagram, especially the younger players. And these are apps that you share stuff from your personal life, but it's also apps where you see stuff about cricket. So you might not read an article in The Guardian that's critical of you, but you might see a pundit on Sky really going into you, or a replay of a dismissal in a game, or something being critical of you. So I think players' relationship with social media, if anything, is actually probably more complicated now than it ever has been. On the sort of inexperience of the England side, quite interesting. There's an interview with Charlotte Edwards on our Patreon this week. She's the latest interview subject in the Bubble series, and Joe Harmon put to her a few things that we talked about on the pod a couple of weeks ago, and Edwards was actually relatively critical of England's players' availability, particularly in the 50 over domestic stuff in recent years, and said that's an area where Australia are just ahead of England. And sometimes we forget that because these are England players, we think, they don't need to think about their development so much. But actually, like, they are still really young and really inexperienced. Obviously, there are 4 or 5 of them who aren't, but the vast majority of England players that are really young and probably need a bit more looking after and more hands-on development.
I think just returning to the fitness thing as well, we've made the point about England's players' availability for domestic tournaments and how you improve as a cricketer by playing cricket all the time, and that England players should be available for more domestic stuff than they currently are available for. I also think that quote from Alex Hartley, as you said, has been blown a little bit out of proportion in terms of, she did say only 20% of the players weren't fit enough. You've always got to be careful when you are saying that players aren't fit enough if you don't have the kind of stats to back that up, because it looks like, I'm not saying this is what Hartley did, but it looks like on appearances, you are looking at a player and going, you are not fit enough. And we saw a year and a half ago when Cricket South Africa imploded over Lizelle Lee and Dane van Niekerk, that it's always hard to pin that down, especially when the research done into female elite sport is not at the same standards to elite men's sport. And Jon Lewis made the point that there are loads of different areas to fitness, as on-field fitness. He mentioned that it was very disappointed about the catches being dropped as well, and that's another area of fitness. But I think you do have to be pretty careful when asserting that some of the players aren't fit enough. Looking at the World Cup, there is some basis to say that some of those players weren't fit enough. When you look at running between the wickets, when you look at how they dealt with the heat, there's probably some basis to back up that quote.
Yeah, I think it's different if I said it.
Yeah,
and Alex Hartley, who won a World Cup and is involved as a current coach, I think.
Exactly.
And I think Hartley is basically as qualified as anyone who's not currently in the team to say that. And I guess another thing is, and Lewis alludes to this as well, is that the scrutiny around the women's team is just increasing. You know, as the game becomes more popular, the scrutiny will increase. People will demand answers more quickly if things don't go wrong, if things don't go right, rather. Other bit of news from the England squad, Paige Scholfield is in, but it sounds like she's going to bat 6 or 7. Thoughts?
Not massively happy. It's great that she's included. We've spoken a lot about not older, but players of that kind of age 25 to late 20s category who aren't often included in England sides or who are discarded. And it's great that Paige Scholfield at the age of 28 is able to come into that England side. I hate saying age 28 like it makes you sound old, but it is great. I can kind of see why they're doing it, in that they are desperate to find that kind of lower order 6 or 7 player who can come in and hit it.
But is Paige Scholfield that player?
I think they're kind of parachuting in, because Danny Gibson is not available for this tour. She's had knee surgery, and she has been that person who they've looked at over the last year to fill that kind of role. Paige Schofield's runs that she scored 100 from number 4 in a Rachel Hayhoe-Flint trophy match, and she also scored 100 from number 6 in a Rachel Hayhoe-Flint trophy match. However, she's really being selected off the back of her performance in the 100 over the summer, and she was put up the order in the 100, and that's where she found success. I also think if you're going to bring a player into the side, you want to give them the most chance possible of scoring runs and building a big base of confidence, and I don't think you're going to do that by asking to come into at number 6, where she might not bat. And even if she does bat, she's probably not going to get that much of an opportunity to build an innings or to bat. And I actually think this is an area that England have consistently got wrong. If you look what they did with Sophia Dunkley and Maya Bouchier, when they brought them into the side, they brought them in at 6 or 7, where they really, really struggled to find any kind of confidence or any kind of rhythm. And then when there was an opening, they brought them up the order. I actually think you need to do it the other way around, where you bring them in up the order, give them that base of runs and that base of confidence, and then if you need a slot lower, you can have a conversation about putting them down the order. But I'm not massively keen on Schofield coming into the side and batting that far down the order.
Yeah, I mean, Schofield's T20 numbers, she averages 46 and strikes 134 at number 3. At number 6, she's only ever batted 5 times in T20 cricket at number 6. She's only ever batted 7 times at number 7. The last time she did that was 5 years ago. So yeah, you're picking someone for a role they just basically never do, which I can sort of see why they're doing it, but I don't think it's ideal. Also, everyone's describing Paige Schofield as an all-rounder. I know she does bowl, but her bowling has never made. I've never watched her bowl and think international bowler.
Yeah, that's also something that wasn't clarified in the call, that the reason she's not been bowling is because she's had a back injury.
Yeah.
And part of Danny Gibson's role in the side, if they want her to come in and do a similar job, is that she is their death bowler. She bowls quite a lot.
So it's not really a like-for-like selection in one way, but they've almost tried to in another way.
Yeah, I feel like there isn't a like for like option coming into the side, so they've gone for as most like for like option they can. Also, then when you think about it, they've not got Capsey in the side anymore, so they don't have that part-time option available for them.
True.
So Nat Sciver-Brunt might end up bowling a lot of overs as well.